A pawnbroker sits in a London office, more furious than a lucky man has any right to be. For 8 weeks, he was paid handsomely to do almost nothing, copying the Encyclopedia Britannica by hand 4 hours a day, purely because of the color of his hair. And then, without warning, the office that employed him vanished overnight, a printed notice nailed to the door in its place. "The League," it read, "is dissolved." Most men would call this a strange stroke of bad luck. Sherlock Holmes calls it the first thread of a serious crime. The pawnbroker is Jabez Wilson, and he has come to Holmes's rooms on Baker Street to explain the strangest 8 weeks of his life. Wilson runs a small pawn shop in Coburg Square, kept afloat largely by his assistant, a young man named Vincent Spaulding, who works for half the usual wages, purely, he claims, to learn the trade. It was Spaulding who first showed Wilson a newspaper advertisement announcing a vacancy in something called the Red-Headed League, a position, it explained, funded by the will of a deceased American millionaire named Ezekiel Hopkins, who left his fortune to be spent employing red-headed men in an almost meaningless role, paying £4 a week for practically no work at all. Spaulding urged Wilson to apply, despite Wilson's doubts that thousands of red-headed men across London would beat him to it. When Wilson arrives at the League's offices in Pope's Court, he finds the staircase packed with men of every conceivable shade of red hair, drawn there by the same absurd promise. Against those odds, Wilson is chosen almost immediately by a man calling himself Duncan Ross, who tugs sharply on Wilson's hair to confirm it isn't dyed, before offering him the job on the spot. The work itself is almost comically simple. Wilson must sit in the League's office from 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, copying entries from the encyclopedia by hand, forbidden from leaving the premises for any reason during those 4 hours. He works his way through abbots, archery, armor, architecture, and Attica before, after 8 uneventful weeks of steady pay, he arrives one morning to find the office locked and a printed card nailed to the door announcing the League's dissolution. He asked the building's landlord, and to his dismay, he just says he never heard of Duncan Ross. The office, he explains, had been let to a solicitor calling himself William Morris, who vacated the premises the day before, leaving no forwarding address. A visit to Somerset House to track down the will of Ezekiel Hopkins turns up no record that such a person ever existed at all. Holmes listened to the entire account, then asked Wilson almost nothing about the League itself. Instead, he wanted to know about Vincent Spaulding, how long he'd worked at the shop, how he came to accept half wages, and what he did with his time. Wilson mentioned, almost as an aside, that Spaulding was a keen amateur photographer who often disappeared down into the cellar to develop his pictures, and that he had a curious splash of scarring on his forehead and both ears pierced for earrings. Holmes and Watson traveled to Coburg Square themselves. Holmes studied the front of the pawn shop, then struck the pavement several times with his cane, listening closely to the sound it made. Without a word, he walked around the block to examine the street directly behind it, confirming his suspicion. He told Watson almost nothing, only that they had serious business that night, and that Watson should bring his revolver. That evening, Holmes gathered Watson, a Scotland Yard inspector named Jones, and the bank's director, Mr. Merriweather, inside the bank's own vault, where 30,000 French gold Napoleons, borrowed from the Bank of France, sat stacked in the dark. The 4 men extinguished their lights and waited in total silence for hours. Until, just after midnight, a flagstone in the vault floor lifted from below, and a pale, agile man climbed up through the gap, followed by an accomplice. Holmes seized the first man by the collar before he could drop back into the tunnel. He was not Vincent Spaulding at all, but John Clay, a notorious thief, forger, and murderer who, by his own unbothered claim, happens to be the grandson of a duke, and who asked, with icy politeness, to be addressed properly and led out through the front door rather than dragged. His accomplice bolted back down the tunnel and was caught separately by officers waiting on the other side.
Once the men were in custody, Holmes explained what Wilson never realized he'd been part of. The Red-Headed League had never been about hiring red-headed men at all. It existed for exactly as long as it took Clay and his accomplice to dig a tunnel from the pawn shop's own cellar into the vault next door. And Clay needed Wilson reliably out of the house for 4 hours a day, every day, for the digging to go unheard and unnoticed. Wilson's dutiful hours spent copying the encyclopedia were the unwitting cover for a robbery being carried out a few feet beneath his own chair the entire time. Every clue Holmes used was available to Wilson and to the police the whole time. The strange advertisement, the assistant's dirtied knees, the scar and pierced ears, the hollow sound of a city pavement. Nothing about the case was hidden. It was simply never questioned. Why didn't Wilson question the absurdness of the offer? Because he's a perfectly competent tradesman. And like most of us, he's more than satisfied, simply content to enjoy an unexpected piece of good fortune, without ever asking why anyone would offer it to him in the first place. Literally the saying, "Gold glitters." What actually caught John Clay wasn't because he had hidden the facts of his crime so well. In fact, it was the opposite, making everything obvious. It was simply Holmes's plain resolve to keep digging deeper, asking persistently on why would anyone pay this well for so little, which is a highly valuable attitude we should also use in life.
Enjoyed this one? Please subscribe and join us for more classic novel stories.